James, a homeowner, faces an escalating battle with Karen, the HOA president, over a gate he built for safety. What begins as a simple dispute quickly turns into a fight for justice and control, challenging Karen's abuse of power. As tensions rise, James must stand up not only for his property, but for the community's right to fairness. What would you do in James's shoes? Do you think Karen was justified in her actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Watch until the end to see how this thrilling story unfolds and what happens to Karen and James. It started like any other morning, but everything changed the moment I stepped outside. My eyes were still heavy from the late shift, and I was barely awake when I saw it. A bright red HOA violation notice stuck to my gate. The wind made the paper flap wildly, almost mocking me. Unauthorized gated structure. Immediate removal required. I froze, gripping the notice so tightly that the edges crinkled under my fingers. This was no mistake. I'd built that reinforced steel gate for a reason. My father, who was elderly and frail, lived with me. It wasn't just for privacy, it was for his safety. If anyone tried to break in, I needed time to get him out. Yet Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, decided it was an eyesore that had to go. What the hell was going on? For 4 years I'd lived here without so much as a complaint, but now Karen, the newly minted HOA president, was going to tear my life apart over a gate? This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control, and she was wielding it like a weapon. I tried to keep my cool. Maybe this was just a mistake. But as I walked toward her house, I just knew, I was about to step into something far darker than I had imagined. Less than 48 hours after our tense confrontation, I got the alert. It was just after midnight, and I was jolted awake by my phone vibrating. My security camera had detected motion. Groggy and disoriented, I opened the app, my stomach sinking when I saw the live feed. Karen's SUV was parked at the end of my driveway. What the hell was she doing here? I watched in disbelief as she idled for a moment. Then suddenly her SUV lurched forward. My heart skipped a beat. Was she? No, she couldn't be. But then it happened. The engine roared to life as Karen floored it, heading straight for my reinforced steel gate. I jumped out of bed, adrenaline kicking in, pulling on a hoodie as I rushed out the front door. My mind raced. This was no accident. I had to get outside. The crash was deafening. A loud, violent thud echoed through the night as Karen's SUV slammed into the gate. I watched in horror as my steel gate barely moved, but Karen's vehicle bounced back like it had hit a concrete wall. The front bumper was crumpled, steam rising from the hood, and a car alarm blared in the distance. My breath caught as I sprinted toward the driveway, hearing my dad's groggy voice call out from his room. "James, what was that?" "Stay inside, Dad," I yelled, already charging down the driveway. By the time I reached the front of the house, Karen was already out of her SUV. She was pacing back and forth, visibly shaking with rage. Her eyes were wide, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her phone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Are you out of your damn mind?" I shouted, stepping closer. She spun around to face me, her face red with fury. "You broke my car," she screeched, her voice high and frantic. I couldn't even process the absurdity. "I broke your car?" I scoffed. "You just tried to ram through my gate, Karen. What the hell is wrong with you?" She jabbed her finger at me, eyes blazing. "This is your fault. If you had just taken down that eyesore of a gate like I told you to, this wouldn't have happened." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Oh, it's my fault. You're the one who tried to destroy private property, Karen. That's literally a crime." Her expression darkened, her voice turning venomous. "This is a community issue. Your gate is ruining the aesthetic of the neighborhood, and I've had enough." I clenched my jaw, my patience slipping away. "You have no right to demand I tear it down, Karen. You're not the one who gets to make those decisions. You're not in charge of me." Karen didn't respond. Instead, she stormed over to the gate, pulling and yanking at the bars like a madwoman, clearly not understanding that the gate was locked. She was desperate, panicked even, as if she had lost all sense of reason. "Open this gate. It's a violation. You're ruining everything," she yelled, her voice becoming more and more hysterical with every second. I pulled out my phone, quickly starting to record the entire scene. I knew I had to capture this. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. "Karen, you need to leave. Now," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You're trespassing on my property." But she wouldn't stop. She kept yanking at the gate, as if her actions could somehow make the reality of the situation vanish. That's when the floodlights I had installed suddenly switched on, illuminating everything in bright, blinding light. Karen staggered back, shielding her eyes with her hand, cursing under her breath. "Turn that off!" she screamed. "No," I said, standing my ground. "I'm recording everything. I want the cameras to get a good look at you breaking the law." For a split second, I saw her face flicker with panic. She turned, her eyes darting toward the camera mounted above the gate, realizing she was caught in the act. The blood drained from her face, but she didn't give up. Instead, she turned back to her SUV, hands shaking as she fumbled with her phone, probably about to come up with some ridiculous excuse for the police. I wasn't going to wait for her to get ahead of me. I immediately dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hi. Yes, I need officers at my address. Someone just tried to ram through my gate with their car and is now trespassing on my property." Karen's eyes widened as she heard me on the phone. She took a step toward me, her voice turning syrupy sweet. Wait, she said, trying to backpedal. "Let's not get the police involved. We can handle this like adults." I raised an eyebrow. "Like how? By destroying my property and making threats?" She swallowed hard, but it was too late. She was already trapped, and I had the evidence to prove it. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance as Karen fidgeted, glancing nervously between me and the approaching police. Her face, once filled with smug confidence, had drained of color. It was a beautiful thing to witness. The very same woman who tried to tear my life apart was now trembling under the weight of her own reckless actions. Minutes later, 2 patrol cars skidded to a halt in front of my house. The officers stepped out, their eyes taking in the scene, the wrecked SUV, Karen's frantic pacing, and the still intact gate that had absorbed her crash like a brick wall. One of the officers, a tall, no-nonsense man with graying hair, looked at me first. "You all right, sir?" he asked, his voice steady. I nodded, pointing toward Karen. "She tried to ram through my gate. My cameras caught the whole thing." I gestured to the security feed on my phone, now playing the footage of Karen's SUV charging toward the gate and crashing into it. The younger officer, a smaller man with a sharp jawline, pulled out a notebook. "All right, ma'am," he said, turning to Karen. "What happened here?" Karen's eyes flared with something close to panic, and she marched right up to the older officer, practically waving her arms in desperation. "Officers, thank God you're here," she cried, playing the victim card. "This man is harassing me. He's built this illegal monstrosity of a gate, and now he's refusing to take it down. It's ruining the entire neighborhood." I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to snap. "She's lying," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That gate is legal. I have all the permits. She tried to destroy my property, and now she's trying to turn this around on me." The younger officer glanced at the footage and raised an eyebrow. "So just to clarify, you deliberately drove into his gate?" he asked, flipping through his notebook. Karen's face twitched. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. She swallowed, then mumbled, "I was just enforcing HOA regulations. This gate is an eyesore, and it's ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic." The older officer sighed, clearly unimpressed. "Ma'am, you don't drive your car into someone's property because you don't like the way it looks. You've just admitted to property damage." He looked at the younger officer, who nodded and scribbled something down. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Karen's face twisted with rage, and for a moment I thought she might explode. But then, in a fit of defiance, she turned on me again. "This is all your fault. You provoked me with that ugly gate. You're the one who's ruined the neighborhood." I couldn't believe the audacity. "You're the one who tried to destroy my property, Karen." I shot back, my voice rising. "And now you're going to pay the price for it. You don't just get to walk away from this." The officers exchanged a look before the older one addressed Karen again, his voice cold and firm. "Ma'am, we have security footage of you deliberately driving into his property and attempting to trespass. You're under arrest for attempted property damage and trespassing." Karen's face drained of all color. She took a step back, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the right words. But there was nothing she could say that would get her out of this. "No, you can't do this," she shrieked, her voice high-pitched with panic. "I have rights. I'm just doing my job as HOA president." The younger officer grabbed her arm, securing it in handcuffs. "You've broken the law, ma'am," he said, his voice laced with impatience. "You're not above the law, no matter what position you hold." Karen fought against the cuffs, her face contorted in pure fury. "You don't understand. I'm protecting the neighborhood. This man's gate." She was cut off by the officer tightening the cuffs as they led her to the patrol car. I stood there watching her being hauled away, unable to suppress a small smirk. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. The woman who had terrorized me for so long was finally being held accountable for her actions. I looked at the officers as they climbed into their cars. "Thanks," I said quietly. "I appreciate you handling this." The older officer nodded. "We've got you covered, sir. Just stay safe from now on." As the police cars drove away, I stood in the driveway, the floodlights still casting harsh shadows over everything. I looked at my damaged gate and then back at Karen's wrecked SUV. It was over, for now. But I knew this wouldn't be the last I'd see of Karen. If there was one thing I'd learned about her, it was that she wouldn't go down without a fight. And the next round was already on the horizon. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cars slowly faded as they pulled away, and the night seemed to settle back into an uneasy silence. I stood in my driveway, staring at the wreckage of Karen's SUV, my mind racing. For a brief moment, I thought I could finally breathe easy. But I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat, especially not after this. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee, the quiet of the neighborhood felt like a calm before a storm. I half expected to see some kind of retaliation, but nothing came, at least not immediately. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I saw the familiar red and white violation notice taped to my gate. My stomach dropped when I read it. Emergency HOA ruling. All homeowners with private gates must have them inspected by the HOA board within 48 hours or face fines or forced removal. I stood there, staring at the paper in disbelief. My heart pounded. How was she still pulling strings after everything that happened? The woman had literally just been arrested for attempted property damage, and now she was back at it, using her power to harass me once again. I stormed over to the HOA office, my mind already racing through the possibilities. I opened the door, and there she was, Karen, sitting at the front desk, wearing a crisp suit and sipping coffee like she hadn't just spent the night in a police car. The audacity! She glanced up when I entered, her lips curling into that infuriating smile of hers. "Oh, James, back so soon? Didn't take long for you to come to terms with reality." I felt my blood boil as I walked up to her. "What the hell is this?" I slapped the violation notice onto the desk, my voice low but seething with anger. Karen casually leaned back in her chair, taking a sip from her mug before answering. "Oh, didn't you hear? After last night's unfortunate incident, the HOA board has decided to take action. We simply can't allow your gate to remain up without inspection. You know, it's for the community." I fought to keep my voice steady, but my fists clenched at my sides. "You're still pulling this crap? After everything that's happened?" She just smiled. "It's not about personal vendettas, James. It's about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood. You really should have thought about that before you built that monstrosity." I was done trying to reason with her. I was done letting her bully me, letting her twist the rules to her advantage. But I needed something more than just my anger. I needed leverage. I needed a way to fight back. I left the office, my mind racing. As soon as I got home, I pulled out the binder I'd been quietly assembling over the last few months. Every complaint, every violation, every shady move Karen had made while in charge of the HOA. I flicked through the pages until I found what I was looking for. A clause buried deep in the HOA's bylaws. There it was, in black and white. Any new rule or regulation affecting homeowners' properties must be approved by a community-wide vote. Karen had skipped that step entirely. She had forced the inspection rule through, thinking no one would question it. She thought she could just wave her hand and get her way. I smirked. She had just handed me the perfect weapon to destroy her. The next morning, I started knocking on doors. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I wasn't going to back down, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let her push me around. The first house I visited was the Johnsons. They were longtime residents, quiet and respectful, but Karen had fined them $200 last year for a garden decoration. I explained the situation to Mrs. Johnson, and her eyes immediately hardened. "Count us in," she said, signing the petition. Her husband, a usually soft-spoken man, nodded silently but firmly. Next, I visited the Patels, who'd been fined $50 by Karen for leaving their trash bins out too long. They were more than happy to add their signatures to my growing list. By the end of the day, I had over 30 signatures, more than enough to challenge Karen's inspection rule and force a real vote. But I didn't stop there. I knew I needed more. I needed to expose Karen's manipulation, to show the entire neighborhood who she really was. So I did something she never expected. I turned to social media. I created a Facebook group titled HOA Reform, Taking Back Our Community, and within hours, it exploded. People started sharing their horror stories, how Karen had fined them for trivial things, how she'd bullied them into submission, how she'd used the HOA board to control every aspect of their lives. Within 24 hours, the group had over 100 members. Karen's reign of terror was unraveling, and she didn't even know it. I couldn't help but smile as I clicked post on my official challenge to the HOA board. I cited the exact bylaws Karen had ignored in forcing the inspection rule through. Now the board had no choice but to schedule a formal vote on it. When Karen found out, she lost it. I was outside watering my lawn when I heard her heels clicking against the pavement. I turned just in time to see her storming toward me, her clipboard in one hand, her face twisted with rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed, stopping right in front of me. I didn't flinch. "Actually, Karen, I know I am." Her fingers tightened around the clipboard. "You had no right to challenge my authority. You have no idea who you're messing with." I laughed, low and taunting. "Actually, Karen, I think I do. Didn't you say that last night, just before you got arrested?" Her face turned crimson with fury, but she said nothing. She stormed off, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew her time was running out. This was the beginning of the end for Karen, and she had no idea what was coming next. After weeks of mounting tension, legal battles, and hidden agendas, the day of the HOA vote had finally arrived. I stood outside my house, staring at my gate, the very same gate that had caused so much chaos, so many sleepless nights, and so much unnecessary conflict. A gate that had become more than just a physical barrier. It had become a symbol of everything Karen had tried to take from me, my privacy, my rights, and my peace of mind. But today, it would be more than just a battle for my gate. It was about taking back control, standing up for what was right, and making sure no one like Karen could ever wield unchecked power again. As I entered the community center where the vote would take place, I could feel the weight of the moment. The room was packed with residents, some who had signed my petition, others who were there out of curiosity. And then there was Karen, sitting at the front, her arms crossed, her usual smug smile plastered across her face. She was completely convinced that she had won this battle. I walked up to the front and stood quietly, waiting for the vote to begin. The air in the room felt thick, as if everyone could sense the importance of what was about to happen. I glanced around the room and saw a few familiar faces. Mrs. Johnson, the Patels, the Wongs, people who had all stood by me through this insane ordeal. The HOA president, the man who had replaced Karen after her arrest, stood up to call the meeting to order. "All right, everyone," he began. "Today we're here to vote on the new regulation regarding the inspection of private gates, specifically the one at James' property." Karen's eyes narrowed, and I could see the tension in her posture. She knew what was coming. "We'll proceed with the vote now," the president said, looking around the room. "All those in favor of keeping the current inspection rule in place, raise your hand." A few hands went up, mostly from the people who were still under Karen's influence, but not enough to pass the rule. Now those against the inspection rule? The hands that went up were unanimous. My supporters, the people who had finally seen Karen for who she truly was. Karen's face went pale, her lips tightening into a thin line. She knew she had lost. The vote was over before it even started. She had no power here anymore. I could see the anger building in her eyes. She stood up abruptly, slamming her palms onto the table. "This is outrageous. You can't just let him get away with this. I've worked too hard for this community." Her voice was shrill, her eyes wild with panic. "Actually, Karen," I said, standing up calmly, "you've done nothing but terrorize this neighborhood for far too long, and it ends today." I felt the weight of the room shift as the residents stared at Karen. The facade was cracking, and her once iron grip on the HOA was slipping away. I had the votes, the support, and the truth on my side. Karen had nothing left but her empty threats. She turned to me, her face twisted in fury. "You think you've won, don't you? This isn't over. You have no idea who you're messing with." I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, I think I do, Karen. I think I've known all along." Karen's hands were trembling, her composure completely shattered. She stood there, staring at me for a long moment, her face burning with resentment. "You'll regret this," she spat, before storming out of the room, slamming the door behind her. As the door slammed, the room erupted into applause. People were cheering, clapping, even shaking my hand as they passed by. It was as if a weight had been lifted from all of us. We were free from the oppressive grip of someone who had used power for selfish gain. The HOA president called for a vote to officially remove Karen from her position, and the motion passed without any opposition. Just like that, she was out. The community was moving forward, and we were no longer going to be bullied into submission, a physical barrier. It had become a symbol of resilience. It represented everything I had fought for: the right to protect my family, to stand up for myself, and to not let someone like Karen have the power to control my life. As I watched the for sale sign go up in front of Karen's house, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. She was gone, and with her, the toxic influence she had cast over this neighborhood. The community was finally free to rebuild, to heal from the damage she had caused. The street seemed quieter, calmer now. There was no longer the constant undercurrent of tension, no more whispered conversations about Karen's next move or how she might be trying to manipulate things behind the scenes. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. I turned away from the gate and looked around at the neighborhood. My neighbors were out, some chatting on their porches, others walking their dogs, and for the first time, it felt like we were truly a community again, one that had stood up and fought back and had come out stronger on the other side. After weeks of tension, James' fight for justice finally pays off. With the support of his community, he exposes Karen's abuse of power and secures a victory that restores fairness and freedom to the neighborhood. Karen's reign is over, and James's gate stands as a symbol of resilience and the power of standing up for what's right. What do you think of James' journey? Do you believe the community made the right decision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about standing up to injustice.